Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I'm your co host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose. And today we have two fabulous guests with us from Howden. We have Michelle Tu, the head of business intelligence and also the creator of Nova, which we're going to hear all about in today's episode. And also we have David Flandro, who is the head of analytics and also pioneered the legendary DuPont method of analyzing companies with the Wharton Business School back in 2008. But I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that as well.
As you probably know, we're going to dive deep into the world of analytics on this episode, and I couldn't think of two more respected and equally famous on the internet now analytics experts as the two of you. So welcome and thank you so much.
It's what I always wanted to do when I grew up.
Be on our podcast or
Yes.
analytics. Oh.
Both, two birds with one stone.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
Oh,
Perfect.
brilliant.
So I guess if we dive right in, when we think about, like, everyone talks about the importance of data and what we, how we leverage it to make the business decisions. But from each of you at a very high level, how would you define analytics in the sort of lens of reinsurance?
Okay. Should I kick off? I'll start with analytics, and then Michelle, you can talk more about data.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about the new analytics in terms of the data-driven analytics versus the traditional analytics of insurance, which is like CAT modeling and actuarial, all super important, bread and butter stuff. But there's analytics as people know it, and then there's like data-driven analytics. But so yeah, go ahead.
That's right. So in the reinsurance business, I would say almost 30 years ago now, we started incorporating analytics. There was CAT modeling, particularly after Hurricane Andrew, but not just Hurricane Andrew. And that I think that might have been analytics 1.0. These are superficial distinctions, obviously. Sometime in the early 2000s, we got DFA modeling, which basically, Monte Carlo simulations, throwing little dots or lasers at distributions, if you will, doing statistical regressions and building economic capital models to try to model insurance companies. That was a technology. And we got some very fabulous tools for the time that became part of that story. There have been other things that have been easy shortcuts in the interim, but really I think in the last 5 to 7 years, just like with everything else, there's been a real sea change. Actually, I forgot to mention spatial analysis. Spatial analysis was a cool technology that came along in the late aughts, early teens. But really, data is something that has become ubiquitous and prevalent in reinsurance analytics in the last 5 to 7 years. And specifically, I mean, data is a word that we all say. We've all been saying this word. AI or machine learning are words that we can say. The thing about data that Michelle and I have learned over the last 2 to 3 years is that it requires careful collection, it requires careful auditing, and it requires people who understand the data and can convey it. You need data scientists, data engineers, and data translators. You need all three of those people in the same room to create a data set that's useful. So what we have now, I would say outside of the US, and particularly in Howden, we have proprietary data sets for claims, buyer behavior, and pricing. And Michelle has terminology of her own. But what that means is we can now look at pricing in individual business lines on a like-for-like basis, going back over a long period of time, that is updated very frequently and homogenously. Now, that might not sound like much, but once you get outside of the US, where you have the Yellow Book and the CIAB surveys and Market Scout, the ubiquity and homogeneity of that type of data is quite low. And with Nova, business intelligence and Michelle have really changed that.
Can you tell us a bit about Nova, Michelle? I'm sure everybody's really excited to hear where that came from and what it does.
So essentially what Nova does, and part of the inspiration to that is, and exploration actually, is to save time, because there is a lot of unreadable data that is just very hard to digest for the average person in our industry to be able to gather insights in what is literally 5 to 10 seconds in a user-friendly format. So, heavily in the 80s and 90s, everyone really looked at Bloomberg, and as a sort of read across by sector And, some people looked at, probably shouldn't say different companies' names, but, there's been tremendous efforts to try to gather all of the different information points. And, a lot of our, especially consulting time, when, our clients want to understand data, a lot of the time spent are people collecting data, and everyone is doing the same thing. Everyone's collecting the same data from the million data sources out there. Is there a go-to place to gather all of this, that's updated? The answer is no. If there is, then that requires a massive team to do so. Are they up to date with with our technology and how to do it most efficiently? No. So there's a few barriers that Nova hopefully aims to address. It's the coverage, the quick insight, but also using the technology to make data, available, or sort of homogenous, so it's a read across not only in the US but globally.
Yeah. I'll give you some examples that are really quite pertinent, especially now that we've built Nova and that we're using it every day. And Michelle mentions Bloomberg, there are other terminals like that in capital markets. We've had them for a very long time. I still barely remember Quotron terminals. Wow, that's embarrassing. But the point is has this existed in insurance? And the answer is no. You can look at all of the statutory filings. You can get service providers to send those to you. They even have financial models outside of the US. The problem is they're heterogeneous. So, and this is a kind of finance geek stuff here, so forgive me, but are we dividing the expense ratio by net premiums earned or net premiums written? Are we adding ancillary income to the loss ratio or not? Every European operating entity has a slightly different answer to that question. Certainly if you get into the MENA region or into Asia, it's a slightly different answer. So that's number one. And that's one of the first innovations that Michelle has created in Nova, is that you've got currently 160 trying to get to 200 plus perfectly homogenous financial models of Lloyd's syndicates and insurers that are perfectly reconciled. So if you want to compare yourself, what's the last 5 years of my loss ratio compared to everybody else, and what's the volatility on the y-axis, you can compare it with the click of the button and be confident that the information are exactly right. And you can do that with so many metrics. I mean, there's 20 different metrics that Michelle has built in that you can do at your fingertips. So that's one big innovation. It's homogeneity of data. That's public data. Another huge innovation is price. If you want to know what the if you want to know what the 5-1 arm for Washington County, Utah is doing today, you can go on Bloomberg and find out what it's trading at right now. If you want to know what's happening in the marine hull market, you can go down to the pub and talk to your mates. You can try to do a renewal. You can try to place something, and then maybe you can kind of figure it out and triangulate. The second innovation, maybe this is the first innovation of Nova, is that we have historical data that's risk adjusted for pricing for multiple different business lines. And Michelle can tell you the number of business lines. I think it's tens of business lines. But then every single 2 weeks or every month, depending on the line of business, we're pulling in the MRC slips and we're automatically updating the price index. Not every quarter, but more frequently. And that's an innovation as well. So if you want to compare, how's the aviation market in Europe doing, I don't know why you want to do this, compared to the D&O market, or how's aviation doing compared to marine in Russia-affected lines, Russia-Ukraine affected lines. You can do that now. And you can look at Howden's proprietary data for pricing, buyer behavior, and claims, in addition to the full homogeneity of all those financial models, and it's in there. And to my knowledge, it's the only industry source that amalgamates all of that stuff, and it's always building. We're always building and improving and adding more. And so that is really quite valuable for strategic discussions. If you're looking for white spaces, where am I writing and what's the profitability of that relative to things that I could be writing? If you want to use it as an underwriting tool, it's quite useful in terms of comparisons. Who are my 5 closest peers and who's performing better and why? These are analyses that Michelle and I have done for over a decade together. It's always bespoke. It's always qualitative. Now we can do it homogenously and quantitatively, and it's a whole new world. The real work, in addition to building the software, was building the data. And this is something that I don't think everybody understands. You have to build the data set. You can't just have different pools of data that are somehow magically transformed by AI, at least not in our sector. You have to have analysts going through and curating the data. And once you've done that, then you can do the automation on a go-forward basis. But it takes a huge amount of work up front, and that's why the build-out has been so successful and extraordinary.
Absolutely. And Jared and I are smiling and nodding a lot here because we've had first-hand experience of grappling with data in previous roles and things elsewhere, but trying to bring similar formats together, or trying to consolidate between different currencies, different measures of net and gross, and similar, as you said, it is really painstaking. And as you said, Michelle, everyone's doing it in their own firms at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And just think about just the national regulators. Even if you just want to look at the national level, every national regulator is different. All of the regulatory filings, I think you've got G20 plus some of your favorites, they're all in there for everything that's reported.
I think you address one of the really important challenges our industry faces. And when we've talked previously on other episodes about one of the things holding reinsurance back is the fact that as the reinsurers try to understand what a risk is, they're left with sort of the lowest common denominator of data. As you said, David, like if I'm receiving submissions and it's always coming in various different forms, it's hard for me to build sophisticated models because there's nothing homogeneous about what my submissions and things look like. But it sounds like as you tackle the sort of data standardization, you're beginning to sort of build models by which you can compare, like on like different data sets and with different clients and other things. You're beginning to introduce now a world where all manner of additional innovation can emerge because we can begin to build models knowing that, well, if you give me any syndicate, I can put it through my model because unlike previously where the basis of premium may be different on any given submission or similar, I have an ability now to, like Bloomberg has done, take consistent components of data and build my own pricing tools and insights around that to understand the risk. So I think it's that starting problem with getting the data in a consistent and high enough quality position that people can do more with. And I think it unlocks a huge amount of innovation in future there. So it's, as you said, like tackling that data piece is a super important, critical first step.
I think it's definitely the read across. Like one thing that I've learned from looking at how many annual reports is, and I know that you guys did a podcast on accounting, that, accountants, especially insurance accountants, can be really creative. There is, I don't want to say there's been a lot of creative accounting, but there's a lot of creative accounting.
in the most benign possible sense is what she's talking about here.
Everything
yes.
that's above the audit.
Yes.
Indeed.
There's no change of audit opinion. It's all been good.
Right.
Everything is above line, IFRS stated, of course. But, I think one of the things that we've tried to do, and this is what we differentiate between data collection and analytics, is Nova, the platform, tries to take the unbiased out, right?
Yeah.
So what I mean is, it's really interesting when I look at earnings report and like, oh, beat this, etc. We're over our 10-year average of this. You're like, okay, I mean, you've selected your peers and you've selected, who you look better against. So yeah, of course you look good, but to do your own analysis, and this is where analytics is you want to choose your own peers, or you want to choose who, it does write large in that line of business because Nova will tell you that, and then create your own set, and then see that read across against that. And because our financial models are built from us, that read across becomes, clean and fair because we've taken that, sort of, I would say, creative accounting out
subjectivity.
of it.
Yeah.
Subjectivity, exactly.
Yeah. That's right. So it really is. The tool itself allows you to do that. And again, it's the way that Michelle and the team have designed it. It's at your fingertips. So you can actually just select whatever peer group you want, select which metrics you want, click the time frame, and you can be sure that you're getting an exact comparison on the metrics that you've selected. And that's really important. Going back to your question about submissions, and by the way, if you're a reinsurer or an insurer and you want to put your data on our platform, call us, because the the other ambition, the longer term ambition of Nova, is to create a critical mass of data that in fact can be used for things like pricing, that can be used for structuring, and that can be used for placing and underwriting. And what I mean by that is if you look at other capital markets, there's always some notional security when you're designing a derivative contract, which is the closest analog in capital markets to reinsurance. So if you have, for example, equities or wheat or commodities or whatever it is, and you're designing derivatives around that, you have a data source that is not just from one party, but it's the amalgam of multiple parties trading that create that price, and then people can trade off of that. Now, reinsurance is highly complex. It's in fact much more complex than most derivatives trading, but ultimately, one thing that could happen in the reinsurance sector is that we could start using pricing data to securitize risk in a new way for multiple lines of business on a calendar year, not an accident year basis. This is purely theoretical right now, to my knowledge, but having a centralized critical mass of data, particularly pricing data, but also crucially claims data, and we do have proprietary triangles in Nova, but if we can get enough people to share data anonymously in Nova, and we can anonymize the data, clearly pursuant to the most stringent GDPR standards. But if we can have, for example, multiple data sources feeding into that marine hull price, and we know that it's valid, and then somebody wants to trade a derivative off of it or create a security with it, that I think is the next step in how reinsurance is placed in 5 or 10 years' time. I don't think it's happening now, but we saw it happen in the derivatives market in the 70s and 80s. Are we that far behind?
Yeah.
No, I think our product is a lot more complex, but this is something that the likes of Nova and a critical mass of data that's facilitated in Nova could facilitate.
Yeah, and you've seen a bit of this before. You saw it with motor claims in the U.S. All the carriers sort of coming together, pooling and sharing their claims data.
Yes.
Initially to help fight fraud, but you saw a huge amount of value
True.
that they all sort of saw when they looked at it. When actually, if we all put our data in here anonymously, we'll all get better insight. And I do think this industry has had a history of collaborating relatively well. So, a time horizon of five or so years, it doesn't feel unreasonable to get people going, what, we'll pool chunks of this data together, we'll help find new areas of business. Our industry is deeply entrepreneurial. And if you make an opportunity where people can go, well, if we contribute this thing, it's going to open up, as you said, more white space for us to explore, more business opportunities for us to build products into. Like, there's a huge appeal for people wanting to contribute to open up more doors. And I think you'll see a real pull to that.
Yeah, and I'm talking about using the data to structure transactions. That's one use of it. We're already blocking and tackling quite a bit in reinsurance vis-a-vis capital markets without very much data, or certainly without any universal data source. So that's one use of it. But another use of it, as Michelle explains, is utilizing the pricing and claims data and the peer comparison data to find, as you say, white spaces, to figure out how and where to underwrite strategically. That's a completely different use of the data. Another strategic use of the data is looking at the up-to-date insured catastrophe reporting that's in Nova, so you can get it earlier than you otherwise would to kind of figure out how things are being affected. Now, much of this happens now in the market through word of mouth, but that's another use for the data. Yet another use is being able to have perfectly consistent financial data for your reinsurer panel so you can better assess counterparty risk in real time if we ever go through another 2008, 2009 moment. So there's that use of the data, but having it all in one place and being able to use it in that way and use it much more quickly than we did last time around is extremely valuable.
Absolutely. I'm always very impressed by the Howden Business Intelligence videos that you put out with all of that rich insight and the charts there.
I'm trying to get Michelle to do those herself.
But they are fabulous, and I really enjoy watching them and seeing just how much insight you can get from what you've built. And I don't want to understate just how much work must be involved in that. What's it been like building that together from, I guess, nothing?
Yeah, so as David said, a lot of it is data creation. And I think first and foremost, the I think inspiration behind the quarterly updates is the theme that everyone has access to the same data, essentially, right? So anyone can do that type of analysis. it's about, putting some sort of analytics and opinion behind it and using data to support that to explain why you think that. So yes, of course, the data collection happens. We're just about, organizing our Q3 right now. So it's so that it's relevant, but ultimately we want it to matter, so that it's actually say, okay, what are the so what's behind that? So you're not just feeding through the same graph and the same table and updating that every quarter, because that's so boring. And
Yeah, it's true.
so we want to make it thematic, topical, and relevant to people, so that they do care about it. Of course, we tried to talk about the big themes that have happened in the quarter, which is why our charts are different, because reserving is very important, but it may be more important, during times of inflation versus a few years ago when that probably wasn't as much of a topic, I don't think.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, though, with this so what piece. I think a
Mhm.
lot of technologists, especially, will go away and they'll devise or build a thing. It's like, here's my widget. And it's like, so what? Like, what is it doing? And I think when you start with a business lens of going, what are we trying to understand, and what are we trying to understand more quickly, you're building towards with the so what in mind.
Yeah.
We have this so that we can now, like,
Mhm.
and I think it's such an important step when building any technology, is to have this lens of what are we trying to deliver, and what are people going to use this thing for? Because it's very easy for people to go like, it does this now, and then no one finds any value from it,
Exactly.
because they've actually not started with a real tangible problem to solve. And it
That's
sounds
right.
like you guys started with the right lens, which is the most important step, I think, in the beginning.
It's an iterative process, right? We started out when Michelle was really drawing up the schemata for Nova. It was interesting because we had ideas, and I think we hit the nail on the head with pricing and buyer behavior and claims, but there are pages in Nova that people use less. Like we have this projections page, which is really cool, and so far I think people use that a little bit less than everything else. But you have to develop it iteratively, and it has to be developed, as you say, pursuant to what clients are asking for. So if people come to us and say, look, I'd really like to have an export function so that I can just download the data, even if it's hard coded, we now have an export function in Nova. So that just happens. The design of the way that, the other thing to remember is that Nova is a lens through which you can look at all of this data. So we still haven't built a software platform that's capable of being all things to all people at all times, but the data are behind it. So if you want to see the raw data and you're a Nova client, you can have access to that too. It's just that the platform itself is the prettiest, most convenient way that we can think of for you to look at. But maybe you can think of a different way, and that's fine. And we can either put that into the design or just show you the data if you need it this week.
Amazing.
I think just broadly speaking about the definition of analytics, as we're sort of, moving along this data journey led, is what I found really interesting throughout this whole journey is, you have the business lens, the commercial lens, so to speak. But then, of course, none of this would be possible without the guys who understand UI, DAX, API, the data scientists, the guys that know nothing about insurance, reinsurance, because
until you teach them, right?
Yeah, and then of course I'm learning a lot from them as well, because you need to know how they operate, and vice versa. Of course, I'm not going to say I know how to write a script, of course, but understanding the end goal, and I think it's the
In all seriousness, you've become sort of a software developer in the last couple of years. I know your software developer friends won't want to hear that, but compared to me, you do know a lot about software development now, because you've had to, yeah.
I mean, it's been an incredible journey, and I think this is what the new definition of analytics and incorporating technology really means. Is yes, of course, doing the traditional stuff, because the bread and butter is what everyone wants and it's definitely needed, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. But it's the when we say data analytics, it's making sure that we incorporate the full journey from creation, development into ultimately showing that into insights.
Yeah.
Because all of that is a journey. It's a journey that we as an industry we're exploring now, and we in Howden are doing that whole journey. So yeah, things don't happen overnight, but it's really sort of using our agility to make sure that we can navigate through all of that, because it hasn't been done in the industry before.
It's taken time to build. But the other thing you just said that was really interesting to me. So you're right. We started out talking about what does data and analytics, or technology and analytics, mean in the reinsurance sector. 25 years ago, I think it mainly meant cat modeling and a bit of computer science. Then I think it meant DFA modeling to some extent, and Monte Carlo simulations and economic capital models and things. And then it evolved further into spatial analysis and everything else. I think that what Michelle just described in terms of her ability as a financial analyst to analyze data is something that I was able to do 10 years ago as a financial analyst. She does it better than me now, but it's not that different. What makes the technology and analytics of the future quite different from what was happening 10 years ago is that Michelle is also a de facto software programmer and a financial analyst. And I know she's going to laugh, but if you think about this in terms of actuarial science, right? Some of the formulas that we use in actuarial science for triangulation, for example, chain ladder and Boardnetta-Ferguson, they are very old formulas and tried and tested, but they create a very familiar reserving cycle with which we're all familiar. What if actuaries were also software programmers? Many of them are. And what if they could use algorithms and augmented intelligence to do actuarial projections using software that they designed themselves? And many do, to be fair, these days. And that is really the difference in terms of using data, using programming, and using mathematical techniques and theories together to create better projections from what we had before, using experience data.
And a lot of our team
Yeah.
encompasses those with the hybrid skills,
Yeah.
where they can look at script code and understand the commercial lens.
I know.
And that's great. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I always think like 15 years ago, what would I have studied? A code?
Well, I think you see this evolution of what these roles look like. We've talked about the evolution of an underwriter, which historically would have been very like matey and a great chat, and they could get deal. And now it's a much more analytical role. It sounds like we'll see the evolution in a similar lens on the broking side, where it's much more analytical, much more capable to sort of build and write scripts that can take in sources of data, build more complex structures and approaches to solving risk, and using tools like you've built to help bring in sources of data to then provide sort of more complex and sophisticated solutions for clients. So I think you're seeing this sort of step change of what is evolving into much more sort of sophisticated roles within the industry.
Yeah.
And technology too. We've all had our computers upgraded and our memory and our RAM, because that's not processing the general pivot table as we normally work with.
Exactly.
So
Right.
Yeah, and it makes us wonder, I guess, many of our listeners will be traditional, I will use the word traditional in relatively recent terms, brokers and underwriters who rely on relationships, who rely on client familiarity, etc. Should they be panicking, or can you see a hybrid team approach? Or?
No, the goal here is really simple. Steve Jobs, when he designed this, he said anybody should be able to use it, and everybody has a stylus. We all have 10 styluses on our hands. It's the same thing with data and technology in reinsurance analytics. If certainly if I can't use it, and if my broking colleagues can't use it, then it's useless.
Yeah.
It has to be, and that was one of the other ideas behind Nova. If you can use your iPhone, you can use Nova, because it's simple enough to use, and if you know the data that you want and you can click around, you can probably find it in there. Now, it might take you a few tries, but probably Google took you a few tries the very first time you used it, right? So that's all it is, and so no, I don't think anybody should panic at all, because what it should do, data and technology should free up underwriters and brokers, or it should enable them, right, rather than slow them down. So that's really the goal here, and I think that you're seeing this. The other blending that you're getting, but we talked about actuaries and data science and programming and software. The other blend that you're getting is that, actuaries and cat modelers and analytics people are not just sitting alongside brokers. In many cases, they are brokers. And that delineation between broking and analytics or underwriting and analytics is almost gone. That did exist very strongly 15 years ago, but it's starting to blur. Those lines are blurring a lot, and that's a good thing because we want brokers to be able to bring their expertise in. If they're not the most technically savvy people in the world, it shouldn't matter because the technology should come to the table. And then if they are, then they should be able to use that to augment what they're doing. And I think that's what's going to happen.
There was a lot of questions that I get asked before Nova, hence the inspiration of Nova, is, oh, can you give me some data to support X, Y, and Z of what I've done? Because I've just said this, and I know it's happening, but I don't have anything to show for that. Like, right, okay, let me draw up some data.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, oh, let me show you how it works in Nova, and then they will then do it themselves, which is great because they know how to then support the stuff that they say.
It's substantiated pub claims, right? It's
Exactly.
like everyone's saying that this thing is happening. And I
Yeah.
believe it to be true because they're all relative experts in their space. But this now gives them the tool to say, yep, here's the data that actually backs this up. We're moving much more towards a data, as you said to start, a very data-driven industry. And it has to be more than everyone seems to be saying X, right? It's now it's like, no, this, if we look at the reports or look at all this, the data coming out, like this is in fact happening.
Exactly.
That's a really important
And
shift.
of course, we can talk like, tactically on a broking or underwriting for a specific deal. Rates are going up. Let's have a look at data that supports that. Cool. But of course, we're talking about strategically as well. Should I be opening up an office in Asia? What's the big bucket sizes? And that's where we talk about the ability to be able to accommodate for the everyday decisions, but also the high level as well. So hopefully that whole analytics piece can be used for those multiple purposes.
How many times have you paid a broker or a consultant to do a market sizing exercise for you? Please size the accident and health market in Latin America for me and show each region by profitability and give me this information about sessions and then I'll pay you a fee. I hope that's gone. I hope that what you can do is you just open Nova, you click on Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, whatever, and the information is just there.
Yeah.
You just have it right in front of you, and it's part of the map.
Yeah.
And I think that's really valuable because it frees up time to make more important strategic decisions, and it's also more economical for clients, I think.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's not just making that data very easy to get hold of, but it's the curation as well, and knowing that it's the correct data and you're not conflating, two very different metrics that come under the same banner, maybe, that have been presented in the same way.
You can have faith in the data that they've been audited, that they are comparable, that they are homogeneous, region by region, company by company. That's absolutely crucial. Otherwise, it's true. You're just comparing apples to pears, and at the end of the day, you're not seeing anything.
Well, and when we started the conversation, David, you took us sort of on a whistle-stop tour of the history of analytics. This feels like it's the next step, right? When you talk about now, you would never underwrite catastrophe risk without looking at models. I can very easily see a world where 4 or 5 years from now, it's like you would never do much of this work anymore without first having access to data like what you present in Nova, going, this is how we help guide what we do. Because why would we write Florida Cat without a model? Like you wouldn't anymore. And I feel this will be the next sort of step of going, this is a ubiquitous piece of technology for how we run the business over the next several years. And it becomes when we talk about this in 15 years from now, they will have this as being one of the points where by which you saw another sort of sea change and then data allowed us to do this. And then we'll evolve and we'll continue to iterate and we'll have another one. But this feels like one of those big moments.
I think that's right. If we achieve enough critical mass, then we really can change the way people are able to see the industry, the way people are able to analyze opportunities, and the way people are able to strategize. We have put our proprietary data on Nova in an anonymized fashion. Again, we want to be the platform of choice for the industry to share its data. So we've got a couple of different things in the hopper right now, but we'd like as many underwriters as possible to share data with us. And if you're amenable, we can create an even bigger data source that could become really valuable industry-wide.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Well,
Fascinating. So is there anything else that you'd like to say to aspiring people who want to get into analytics, who maybe haven't got involved so far? How do they start? Where do you join the analytics revolution in reinsurance?
Well, just no matter what you do right now, you can think of yourself as an analytics person if that's what's interesting to you.
Mm.
If you're an underwriter, if you're a broker, like I said, those lines are blurring more and more. Clearly, there are people that have the gift of the gab and they're better at selling, and those people are always going to be brokers. We're always going to need to have to sell something, right? But if you are analytically minded, you can be in analytics and in broking. You can be in analytics and in underwriting. You can be a data technology and analytics expert and be a really good underwriter. So I don't think that the distinctions are as necessary as they maybe once were.
That's super, super interesting. And thank you both for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure we're going to have a huge amount of followers and shares from this one. So thank you both.
It's a pleasure. I hope you guys are good editors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.